Yeah, maybe the only thing I have to say is that as soon as we were done with choosing the theme for this semester, we thought Arno would fit perfectly for resistance. So thank you again for answering positively, for coming to discuss with us. And I will let you speak. I think we will discuss.
No. I don't have a lecture. We have a discussion. That was the
deal.
That was the deal. So when you asked us to send an image, we were sending you a brown color. So why were you astonished?
Sorry?
Why were you astonished when we were sending just plain color, a brown color?
Normally, when you ask an architect for an image that represents their work and to put it on a poster for a lecture, they give like the latest project, the nicest image they have, so people come and get together and listen to what you do. And you gave brown paper. And so I was like, no one comes for us lecture tonight.
Just to say a little maximum show, as I said, one project. Maybe I show one image of another project, but I don't want to show more or less architectural projects. But I think that everything that we will discuss, and maybe that I'm also showing, is architecture. That's maybe the... So that maybe I shortly explain this brown color, because and then we could have a round of questions and discuss it, and then maybe we come to another topic, and then I always have to look for some other images, but I will find some. One important note is I never work alone. So also if I say me, I, you can be sure there's at least one other involved. Normally we work in groups of 3, 4 for each of the projects. And just to give an example, as Jan is teaching here, we're just working on one project together. So, and it's various partnerships. Some are existing longer, and it turns out that it's more efficient and more playful than to build up an office that's only growing. For the moment, in what we call the office, it's maybe 16 people, but it's a much bigger range involved. So one time I got bankrupt as an architect, but we had a limited construction, so it was not too hurting. But anyhow, it was a strange feeling. So that was more or less, was also a love story involved, but I moved then to Berlin. And when we came to Berlin, there was a competition for a new temporary art hall, and we thought, well, art hall, fancy, and it should be like 3 weeks, 3 months close to the main station. It was called Humboldt-Hafen, which is a little water close to the main station. And before we had looked around in the city, and we had discovered this area. It's in the former West. Was laying there since 20 years already. It was an investment ruin, and they wanted to build a sports hotel. And basically what you see was written Vereinsheim. Not all of you speak German. It was the most famous Fußballclub, Hertha BSC, from Berlin, and we thought that's a nice, strange coincidence. So now you have to move. Sorry, 2 images I didn't turn them. So that was the old Tribune, and that was basically one of the rooms in the underground already existent. And when we scanned all the rooms, the height of the rooms, it turned out it were around 2,000 square meters, the perfect rooms for an art hall, which then shouldn't be just contemporary, just for temporary for a certain amount of time. And the whole ground was owned by the city of Berlin. And we thought, that's great. They have this kind of stinky old fish in their drawer. They don't know what to do with it. It's belonging to the city. So we just propose that this should be the art hall. We won the competition, and then the guys who organized the whole set asked the city for the crown, and it was just sold. So 8 days before, this crown was sold to a completely ridiculous price. And then we found out that the city of Berlin was selling out public property, selling out because they needed money, but a return of selling out crowns, public properties, also school buildings, whatever they didn't use for the moment, means that you only have a one-time income, no? You can't work with it anymore as a city. So we asked, that it was like 8 weeks before the elections of Berlin. So we asked all the party leaders, who of you would change this selling out of public property? And then it was something strange happening. So the conservatives, that are the blacks, that wrote as well, you know, we could think about changing something, maybe, in future. The Social Democrats wrote as well, we are since long time thinking about changing something, but you know, all the economy, but we keep on thinking about something. The Green Party is the same, the leftists the same, and then we thought, that's strange. If we are living in a kind of, it's different in Switzerland, but still it's a kind of representative democracy, not so much developed direct democracy like in Switzerland and Germany, but it's a representative democracy. And what does it mean if nobody represents a difference? If I would like to vote the one who's going, if he comes into government, who's going to change the complete sell out of public property, and everybody is just saying, well, we could, where's the difference? So I'm not represented. And we thought, okay, how can we deal? So that was Wobereit, this was his campaign. There were not even like topics on the advertisement for the elections. It was just like understanding Berlin. But the others was the same. It was shifted from a kind of argumentative campaign to a pure atmospheric campaign. And that was more or less the same for all parties. So first of all, we published those letters they wrote us back, but it's all the same. They didn't react. Then we were starting to read out of the party programs. Yeah, Green is the party program, and we just were reading the parts that were dealing with public property. So yellow is the liberals in Germany, red is the Social Democrats. And we started with public readings. Nothing happened. Then we thought, okay, so if this is the parties that were for election, and they don't have a difference, we just mix let's say, they all have a kind of very specific color. We just mix the color. So one is for printed color, one is for, if it's used for laptops, handies, and whatever. And we provided that color in the name of indifference of a possible way how to make your own decision to vote. Then we got, now this is a very nice color. It's also in Germany slightly difficult. And then we provided the color first as a new backdrop for the computers, for iPhones, and then it really started to function. So we just said, okay, we had a page that was called AGB seen by K, where there was a little information why we are doing that, and then it's more and more and more. Then newspapers started to print their political part of the newspapers, to print it not in black but in that brown. There were newspapers that were printing a whole page just in that brown. Then we got some money, funny-wise, from the state itself. So here we put some glue, like we use for wallpapers, into little bags. We were printing these posters, and they were at Neue Nationalgalerie, so in a lot of galleries, public spaces, and people could just take them and use those bags. You have to put some water in, a zipper bag, then you could like pour it on the back of the poster, and then use it as a glove to get all the glue around the poster. And then people started to glue over the advertisement of the political campaign. So in Germany it's like 4 weeks before the elections they are allowed to do their campaign in the public. And then it became a real topic. So, and in the end it was like, as there's a lot of activist groups in Berlin, we just started that, and we were co-founders of one initiative that's called Stadt Neudenken, Rethink the City. And then it became more and more groups of that. Then they more or less forced the government to have a round table on the topic of real estate policy of the government, still just the Berlin state government. And they stopped the Liegenschaftsfonds, though that was the kind of body that was selling out the property of Berlin. And they stopped it completely. And now, after 4 years, now it's the next elections, were in September. So it was one term that the whole real estate policy changed. So would we call that architecture or not? That's the first. Well, you asked to put something in and we can discuss it now.
Is it architecture or urban planning?
You have to speak louder.
Is it architecture or urban planning?
Would you make a difference between architectural objects and urban, let's say, urban being, environmental questions? Could we reduce within a city architecture just to the house and the rest of the city is something else? Or the other way around, we are now facing a huge growth in Berlin, which was clear already at that time, but just that the governments sometimes need longer to incorporate something that's some dynamics. And now there are missing spaces for schools, for kindergartens, for sports fields, because they don't have the ground anymore, for social housing. So, architecture or not?
Actually, honestly, I was about to ask personally, where is architecture? Like when you were saying this is only politics, this is like sticking indifference around the city. So it's politics. As we were saying before in this, in this discussion, is our profession political? And this is not space. This is no architecture.
Why is it not space?
Because
Where's space?
people themselves use the brown posters. It's not that we were gluing them. We printed like 10,000. And there were some, let's say, some police got some people gluing, and for sure the kind of damage you do, you damage another poster with a value of maybe 70 cents. So they would never open a case. But it was a campaigning really well functioning with newspapers because they're all campaigning, let's say, for a different deal with public property. So let's say our property.
In a way, to me, I mean, it's like as soon as the perception of a space changes, that can do maybe as much as making a new building sometimes.
Yes.
So in a way, that makes it very architectural.
And I think also it's very rare that people can commit and engage so directly. And to add something, because in your little booklet you had for the resistance topic, you're saying it's all going to images, to imagineering. And just to add a pure color, it means that people have to add the content. No, it's not already written. The color itself has no meaning. You know that
And I mean, in a way, there's this really famous project, an early La Carton Vassal project, where they won the competition for the redesign of this public plaza by saying you should just leave it the way it is and just explain it better to the people. And in a way, it's the same thing on a larger scale, saying look as a city at what you have. But what would be interesting is you say the result is that they don't sell out the public property anymore, but that's just the first step, because unless there is someone in the administration who starts to look through what do we have as public property and how could we use it in a good way, that's still not really any benefit for the public space.
now they just use it for public purposes, like for schools, infrastructure, education, and social housing. But I think it's completely right, because what was just missing in that case when we got to that ground, that the one hand of it was also a state-run competition. So Wobereit, the mayor at that time, he claimed that competition. And on the same hand, he didn't know that somewhere else in this administration, they have something like a remnant, like a catastrophe, lying around that could be related to this kind of high culture. And the art hall is high culture, and I thought it's very interesting to relate it to low culture, to this Fußball culture that is quite great and big in Germany.
What is the goal of this sticking around the color? What is the goal? If you have to express the goal of this action of reducing parties into a color and sticking around posters, to obtain.
Let's say we wanted to convince them still that they should. We didn't know at that moment that when we were doing that competition that we didn't know about this practice of selling out public ground. So one possibility would have been, well, shit, we didn't get a commission out of the competition, and have some beer and life is nice again. So, but then we were asking, why is that happening? Because it was so nice, the ground, no? That it's all there. It was very good concrete. We thought, architectural-wise, it would be very interesting to implement this Kunsthalle there, and not just have it for 3 months with the same budget, just at the main station. What happened then was it did not happen at all. And this not happening sometimes helps to get a new awareness. And I really believe in the power of public. So also if you complained about acceleration and in your little booklet, I think one thing we architects are really good in or really trained is producing images. No? And normally we use our images only to make our own design look better. And then there's shit, this other, this colleague this from the next row, he's so much better in making images, but he is a much worse architect, but just because he's producing these nice images. So I think this kind of surface we are talking about can be very helpful. And at least we are trained in a way that we can discover this kind of cases. I think somebody else wouldn't have had the capacity to be interested, why is it like that? Why is an urban situation laying around and not being used? Then, on the other hand, they need space.
But maybe directly to this, because you said it and I didn't get it, but the competition, did it have a site?
Yeah, it was close to the main station, Humboldt-Hafen, and this was called Humboldt-Hafen.
And you just discovered it through this coincidence?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we were really fascinated by that site, maybe. Okay. And well, that's really good.
It was really just like, do I have to imagine you type in Google Humboldt H and then it comes both up?
Yeah.
Okay. No, but it's great.
But following your proposition, you just said that architecture needs to face the urban, and so needs to face the public side of our life. So, but as you said, we wrote, and it's true in our little booklet, acceleration and oikos over the polis, and this is what we wrote. But my question back is, then what is public nowadays? If we know that new squares are built just by, or not just, but by private banks or private investors, where is here the public? Also, when the state pays for a public space, we all know that it's not just the state who pays for it, but there's also a private investors behind it.
So how does it start with this, your Italian ideal of a place, with the agora and the theater, no? It starts exactly here in that staircase. It's not that you wouldn't be allowed to go in the lecture hall, no?
No.
You made a decision that you don't want to go to the lecture hall and make this a lecture hall. So, is this public? Is this creating a new public? Yes, it is. It's basically that we can contribute with and you made this difference. You said no to the official lecture hall, and you said yes to a staircase, which is normally a transition space.
Yeah.
So that's architecture, and that makes it a public space for that moment.
So you mean that public is the way people use a space?
Yeah, and how you contribute to that discussion. Yeah, it's right. Mostly it's becoming these public-private partnerships. Yeah, it's right. They pay off for getting more high-rise to make it a pocket park in New York, and all these things are right. But still,
We are able to decide.
yeah, you can make decisions, and you can claim, well, that's not okay. We don't like that. It's so easy. And for the moment here, let's say, this is a, let's call him lecturer. Here's like, I don't know, 70, 80 people. So who's the majority? If we would do any vote now on what's public and private, you are the majority. You just have to organize yourself. So that's my, it's not worth ever to complain. Because then you get like cancer and you get a bad life. But if you get aware of something, you have to research. That's also true. You can't just, and it's taking of your time. You invest time, that's for sure. Yeah.
Has there been, or is there in sight for the future a project of reuse into a new program of property in Berlin that you can think of that would be a result of this change, or do you think it's still to come in the future?
Let's say for the moment, as we try to make, normally we try to make our projects, if it's coming to more something like architecture, to make it an argument on a wider discussion. For the moment, we try to find something that's coming out of the Siam Congress, that all the, let's say, the parts of the city are declared as either living or working or leisure. And you know, I think it's the same here, no? It's a classic Flächennutzungsplan. And we think working and living, if work became less polluting, and you all, and later on you will also have to work at home because you can't afford maybe to have an office and an apartment. So, and it's a lot of these cultural producers where it's coming much more close, and also the lifestyle is changing, no? That it's part of everyday, that's part of the life. So we are fighting now against, in a certain area, that they should allow housing and culture in the industrial area. I could show 3 or 4 images. We just started, but it's not a finished project. I have to look for it. I'm not even sure. So we are talking about this area in the middle here, so you can see it's really industrial area. It was taken over by the Vietnamese community in Berlin. The guest workers in East Berlin were mainly from Vietnam, as the Turkish population in Berlin is based on the guest worker program in the West. And this is still production, what you see, but all the rest of this area, I go quickly, no, I don't have it. It's like huge trading zones. And this was a graphite factory, and these 2 towers were left over. And so now we bought these 2 towers, and they were really cheap because they're only standing because removal costs were so expensive that they couldn't build a new, let's say, trading facility. And we do ateliers now, which is forbidden. We do a restaurant, which is forbidden. We do exhibition space, which is forbidden. And we know that it's forbidden. And we declare it officially, we are doing something forbidden. And now there's something strange happening, because in these industrial areas, no sports is allowed, no culture is allowed. It's a kind of, coming from an economical point of view, it's clear that even heavy industry should have a place to develop, but it's within the city. And we thought, isn't that stupid that we still have protection areas that exclude, let's say, other forms of life? So now something strange is happening. So we started working, so the authorities come and they, well, you are not allowed to do that. We said, yes, that's true. We wrote already a letter to your office that we are doing something that's not allowed to print letters in the newspapers and public letters. But we are also, let's say, campaigning other magazines, mostly in art magazines. We renamed the whole thing. We call it San Gimignano Lichtenberg because we thought we could be helped by this romantic part of the Germans that San Gimignano is something very positive, holiday related. And I don't know, you see this round dot there in the middle. The first thing we did out of trash, we were building, do I have it in here? We built a little mountain. This is a partner, he's a filmmaker, Christopher Roth. So this one is built this little mountain. What's happening now when they have weddings in the Vietnamese scene, we are not really related to them because they still talk Vietnamese. But to make the photo shoot of the wedding where everybody should stand in one image, now they would all come there on this little mountain, stand in this kind of, they're doing the photo there. And then we asked the one who's running the whole, and it's like 200,000 square meters of trading zone. So, and it's, I don't know how many, it's like thousands of Vietnamese traders there. Then we are, and they have their own security service. So we asked the one who's organizing, oh, could you include us in your security service? We are providing the holiday mountain, the wedding mountain for the photos. And he was, oh, welcome, for sure. So now nothing else is stolen from our stuff. We have somehow made the first deal with them. And now it's getting even more complicated for authorities. And we always claim we should rethink the industrial area status of that area, and also in general. Meanwhile, after this brown poster action, the new mayor is called Michael Müller. Formerly he was a senator for urban development. And then he came and asked me to be one of his members in the advisory board. Now he became mayor, and now it's becoming a completely different situation. So I would always text, let's say, his assistant first, what's our next step, and now they're just they have to form a three-party system now, it will be red or green, and now one sentence they have in the kind of declaration on what basis these three parties will work together in the next 4 years, it's written that they will rethink the kind of status of definitions of areas in Berlin, and they will use a new topic, a new category, which is called urbanes Gebiet, which means something that's still a production area, but housing will be allowed, but as a tenant, or even if you do a housing project there, you have to know that you will have more noise emission and whatever, because there will be trucks nighttime, and you can't blame, well, that's after 10 and trucks are allowed to drive by. So it also means that you yourself have to adapt to that, which is not so uncomplicated, no? Because it might be that if you think that further, that the new social housing will be there because those tenants can't complain because they're happy to get a cheap rental space. So we are still in discussion on that.
Can I ask one thing? Here. This project, you said, I just done something out of law. I declare this. I want to reuse in a certain way. And then before, during the interview, you told us that some part of your practice is doing projects which you like sponsor yourself. So you difficultly work with clients. Is this because you don't accept compromise? Or
no, we also
you
work
have a
for
different
clients.
reason? I mean,
so working is always a compromise. No, staying in bed, party all night, or getting up. And it's also to find practice. So here we are 4 people doing that, And we are rather clear that we will never be able to sell that again. So this is a kind of playground. And it was so cheap that we can afford even to keep it as playground. No? To do summer academies, whatever. So, like, to play it. And education is not allowed there. But what does it mean it's not allowed? So in Germany we have, on one hand you have the let's say, the privileges you gain by having property. And already in our first constitution is written that Eigentum verpflichtet, so property obliges. But it was never, let's say, described very well what that really means, that property obliges. We would all agree somehow. So if there's something, I would say, if there's something not used and those two towers are not used, then there is a basic right to use them. And even if this basic right to use them is reduced by this industrial character of the surrounding, the question is still which right has what level? What does it mean it's forbidden? It's just, or let's say it's not even forbidden, it's not allowed. But what does it mean? If it makes sense, if people like it, if we don't harm nobody, so what does it mean then that something is not allowed? Especially when it comes to these categories. And if you just think, now we can put the same questions as urbanism, or is it architecture? Yeah, for sure it's urbanism. But it becomes very logic. So in front of that, on that industrial area, there is still houses from the 19th century, a whole row of houses with 280 apartments. They haven't been used since reunification, since '89. Now all the refugees and everybody is coming and they wanted, and even the Vietnamese community wanted to move into these apartments. But as these apartments are out of use longer than 10 years, then they are not longer regarded as being apartments by law. And now, as it's industrial area, you would need a new permission to use them as apartments, which you don't get because in industrial areas, housing is not allowed. But there are houses, and we need housing. So, and for sure now on in the local part, because Berlin is organized in districts that are somehow autonomous. So the district of Lichtenberg now is campaigning for us and for or we help them to campaign. This means they need like very little phrases. They need like 3-minute versions and 30-minute versions. Like really they ask us architects to help them campaign within the Senate of Berlin. Anything? And what's interesting, what they first asked us were photos of Vietnamese weddings to use for their own campaign. To say, well, they brought green, they work well with the local community, and they use the towers. And they use the towers in the industrial area for a non-industrial purpose. So, but it's not a rendering. You can't render those images. You can render with a Vietnamese wedding, but then it doesn't make sense. But you could say, if you make it a little bit harsh, it's a kind of real-time rendering what we are doing. Campaigning would be, in that sense, a real-time rendering. A very slow machine, let's say.
In the end, it's always the image that transmits the message. So even if you resist or if you want to change something, you have to talk with the help of images, like the images of the Vietnamese weddings or just a brown color.
Or name. So one is images, one is naming, like calling that San Gimignano Lichtenberg, and like to overlay the history which was a really polluting graphite factory,
Which in a way is an image making.
which is image making, right? But
By
Not
in
by-
another.
another with language, and you have to use it. So any image, no matter on what level, if there is not a real use, then it's worthless.
There has to be an action behind
In
it.
action, yeah, it's also about action.
But in a way, like just to round it up a bit, it's like the two aspects of like a space and the perception of the space. And I think it's very easy to think of examples where a space is made, but it's not perceived in the way it was intended, and for that reason doesn't function. I mean, like the pocket park behind this building with a little playground, where there's never anybody. And this kind of project is like coming from the other side. It's not building anything, it's just changing the perception of a space which is already there. And through this creates maybe the same function that in another place you would create by building something new, which might even fail if it doesn't achieve. Yeah.
Especially if it's not used.
Yes, exactly.
So what does it mean? Are you allowed now to garden in this pocket park?
We don't have time. We should try.
A little, I don't know.
And this is also really related, at least for me, with one of your other projects, which is the Antivilla also, where
Okay, so that will be the only architectural project. So I show this hole again and this hole again, that we have a kind of relation. That were existing ones. Okay, here are where the red dot is. We don't see it well in black and white. This is Berlin, and the next city here is Potsdam. So it's directly at the ex-border of east and west. At the lakeside. And you see it's not many houses there, and it was basically a factory for East German women's underwear. Not so very sexy one, but that was widely used. They had to use it. This was a building, it's a really ugly building. It's looking like a too huge one family house. It has a fiber asbestos roof. It was for sale because on this ground where this building is standing, you would have been allowed to build a one-story building with 100 square meters at a lakeside. This building has 500 square meters. And a friend of mine texted me, there's this bra factory, which turned out wasn't a bra factory, but the underwear factory is very cheap for sale. It was so cheap because the removal costs of that building were a minus in the price. And the price basically was just to build a 100 square meter one family house. And then we thought, well, maybe we could ask our bank again that we provide the rock construction, they finance the rest, just by keeping it. So that's what they produced there. That's how it was looking inside. Everything was taken out because it was already open for demolition. So all the windows were reused already and somewhere else. In the back, that was a cultural barrack, they called it, Kulturbaracke, where they would, and every East German production had that, where they could celebrate birthdays or get some ideological education. And I start with this one. So this was really, as you can see, it's not in a good shape. And we started in our practice very early, like playing with the existing goals, with the existing laws, and trying to play it better than the ones who made them. Here there is a regulation that if 3 walls are standing, it's still existing, and what's existing is protected. So if you count now walls, we have half a wall there, one there, so altogether maybe it's 3 walls. But if you would remove one of those, then if it's less than 3 walls, the building is officially not existing. So we started cleaning, putting some very done formwork from the inside, he also from the outside. So, and we were just pouring concrete in. That was a 2 weeks action with 12 people. What came out is the cast of the formerly existing walls. So then the authorities came when it was finished and well, that's completely new made. And we said, no, the walls were there for every moment. Otherwise, you couldn't have the cast. So for any moment of this building, you had 3 walls standing. Okay, according to the regulations. So for sure, it's a kind of, most of you know this work of Rachel Whitehead in the late 80s, where she casted the building. So we called it Rachel, not to claim her method, but it was all the proof towards authorities that it could exist. And they were like this really, it was more like paper walls they had, so they were cracking, or where there was color on, where there was no color on, they were getting wet and being more flexible, so more looking like cushions now. It's a very nice building, no? And we could never have designed it. And then some windows in, and now this is the guest house. There's a toilet behind the window, behind the mirror. So, coming to that building. There is one reason we researched why are there so many small windows. And it turned out that there were apprentices from Mozambique and also Vietnam and others. They were trained in a kind of 3 months course how to build a house, and then they would go back to their sister and brother countries, to Mozambique. So they were trained, and everybody of those apprentices had to make in the end one window. And as there were so many apprentices, the windows became so small and all the same size up there. Because then it was just like the administration of this factory, and the next building was, and there was storage there in the ground floor. The next thing was, we said, what should we do with 500 square meter building? We don't need it. So we thought, okay, one thing is clear, we have to remove the roof, because it's 500 space, we do a new concrete roof on top, slightly declined, that the water is going out. It was also a test whether a concrete roof without any more, let's say, insulation, waterproof concrete would resist to summer, winter conditions. We wanted to test for another building. Then we put in the middle, we put this kind of core with a sauna, bathroom and a kitchen, and we have those curtains. And those curtains basically helped us because we have energy laws also in Germany, we wanted to fulfill them, but we said, okay, that was the first draft when we had like 2 layers of curtain, that we create something like climate zones inside. But the curtain completely transparent, 1 millimeter mesh, so just the air doesn't mix up. So we only heat the sauna and the oven. So that's how we build, and we make an angle round roof. That's a view, perfect. Then we tested how to make holes, and we thought, well, we can't decide in a kind of neighborhood which is Potsdam and the park of Sanssouci and the castle of Sanssouci and the next village 4 kilometers away. It's all really proper villas from the 20s and 30s and huge villas. The chief of the Neue Zürcher Zeitung has a house there. So we made this collage for the biennial when we were invited for the German Pavilion, which we thought what could happen if we like act in a more Temrock way. Do you know the film Temrock with Michel Piccoli? So we made a little party, we had this flyer, friends please come, that's the action day. So it was in 2013, we provided flash hammers, other tools, beer, soup. And the new roof, it was this concrete roof, had a little edge at the corner. So therefore we were allowed to smash in wherever we like. It was not like that it's there or there or there. We were allowed up to 5 meters. That was what we would provide everywhere. And we have to keep at least 1/3 of the length of the wall, that the roof, the concrete roof, is still like load-bearing functioning. And the corners have to stay for stability reasons. Okay, so that how we started today. Yeah, so that's how we worked. Next day was horrible for most of us because we're not used to work with this kind of machines, even overhead. And at the end of the day, we had some holes. Yeah, and every crew, it was like those 3-4 people worked on one hole because otherwise you can't work, and they decided on themselves where to put the holes. So that's how it's looking now. It's a little bit strange, maybe, but you see the edge, which is functioning like a beam. Okay, so then we decided how to name it. As there were all the villas around, and 500 square meter is normally the size of a villa. The comfort you have in, because you have like, depends on the window, you have like, last winter we needed the curtains, then you have only 70 square meters heated. And it produces a delta inside the curtain, outside of 8 degrees. So if you heat the sauna and the oven, you have like, let's say 90 degrees, and outside you have 12, 11. You can walk through, but it's the coldest day. And then we thought, okay, let's buy a German Bison. This is the curtain, as you can see, it's rather transparent. We got all the lamps from the church that was broken down by Rudolf Schwarz, and he also designed all the lamps. So that was the beginning. We had no more than the curtain and the fur. Okay, put some other things in. Then we asked artists to, this chair is not, it's also a chair. It's by Matty Brown, for example. The white piece of wallpaper is by Karin Sander. It's an East German product. And then what happening that also the artists would like communicate the whole system. You can see we just glued windows from the inside, and only one we can open because it's really expensive, this kind of sliding doors, and just to glue a piece of glass, insulation glass is cheap. The black part here is a work by Gregor Hildebrand. It's made out of audio tapes, a kind of packet out of audio tapes. The sculpture there is also from a friend we have from this building. All the material inside is the existing one, this gray. Yeah. It's a rather cheap kitchen. The sauna for sure, because we need the heat. And it's also about pleasure. In the beginning we had this round thing was where the bed is, that you can like close the bed up, because we use it also for conferences and whatever. So if this was looking like that before, that was the image after. And we spent altogether the same amount of money for this 500 square meter. It's then a new built 100 square meter house. But yeah. So then it's a rather easy question. Do you want to have 500 square meter that you can use from, let's say, March to October, and maybe 70, 80 square meter in winter time, or would you like to have 100 square meter all year long? And that was coming this anti-villa, because we wanted to turn it and that people start to think about the kind of standards we have implemented to when it comes to housing. Easy that where I grew up, it was rather cold in my sleeping room, I have to say. At my grandmother's was completely different, and she got really old. So, do I have to wear a t-shirt in winter time as well at home? No, I don't know. So, but going one question back. So, we thought the process of designing was completely clear. Then it turned out it's two images. One, the down one, is the original, and then it was Halloween time, and all the photos looked like these pumpkins, this Halloween pumpkin. And I said, oh shit, it's a little bit like a nose, and teeth, and a little face there, and oh. Then I asked an artist, Manfred Pernis, and that, have a look, we have a face problem. And then he came that we have to change the angle. You see in the one above, that was he just used a photocopy and was gluing into We have to make one corner straight again. Okay, then we did one corner straight again. I couldn't have decided that in that moment because our, let's say, principle of design was like it's a shared, we shared with 25 people, they come, they help, we drink. How can I go on designing if I refused designing before, refused to say how wide is the window? Then it went to biennial and then blah. So now we can, and what's interesting enough, then it became front cover of the New York Times magazine. We got like 20 now, it's 5 left in the States, people that asked us whether we could treat their home badly. They would like, they have lived there since 25 years. In one case, it's a woman, she said, my husband died already 5 years ago, I don't want to live in that house I was in. Can you please do something to change it completely? But I want to stay there. So, what does it mean now in terms of, I don't know, communication, of possible thinking about the anti? So it's two things related. So one is really the question of standard, how much do we need? What we always try to communicate with that. The other one was, we were dealing with a kind of, just to say how quick this goes also, we were dealing in norm with the energy sufficiency. Because we could say we have 500 square meter allowed per year to spend a certain amount of energy. We spent this amount of energy. But instead of insulation of the walls, we just used the curtain. And within, I think it was 3.5, 4 months, then they precised one part of the law that in all these models you can use to calculate the energy balance, you're from now on not allowed to count with material that's less thick than 2 centimeters. So curtain is not thought to be a material of building anymore when it comes to energy loss. But still the question of standard we can highly well communicate. And there is another story, and for sure it's like there is wild parties going on. We have a lot of fun there. We use the lake. You can get drunk and jump naked into the lake, and whatever you want to do there. So it means low standards allows us to have the space, because that makes, economical wise, the low cost. So what does it mean now? How to evaluate this kind of architecture? And I guess it became so well, let's say, published, because it's on some nerve of the current freedom. Do we always have to extend standards? Would we like to be a little bit more anarchic about our own decision how to live? So something was, let's say, in the field. And you were writing in your little note that, what did you write? That, no, you didn't want to protect the old, that was a museum, but you were not really into going into the future, no?
Yeah, it's
and I
about
think
protecting.
we didn't like that maybe this should disappear and all the grey energy that was in should disappear, and we should just use it. But we should celebrate it. It's not about complaining, oh, it's an ugly building, energy laws are terrible, oh. No, it can be something really nice. And as it was so cheap, that's maybe the next point, we don't use it. We use it as a weekend house, and a lot of people have keys for it. And for the part, the basement, which is not usable the whole year, we would give to an artist every year, and he would leave a new artwork behind. That's a trade. So if something is so cheap, you don't have to make money with it to refinance. That allows you to come up with a completely different system of sharing. So, and then that I think is has quite a lot to do with architecture also, which is enabled by the economics, by maybe the kind of Tamrock-like look, But it's quite clear, no? We want to see out of the lakeside, we make a hole. We want to see the forest, we make a hole. What?
I find this really interesting, this way of designing that kind of liberates yourself from personality. Like you resist to your maybe willing to, I don't know, over-design or controlling everything. But what came out is a really personal piece. Like even though you didn't actually control everything, like did you resist to your personality or to your willing to put like something of yourself in it?
I really like to break holes in the wall. You know, there's so much bad architecture around. If you ever stay in an apartment with a small window, what would you like most? No? And I like that. It's a pleasure. That's the most direct way of architecture. Window too small, make it bigger. And there is a lot of design in, I would say, because to make this roof in a way that this edge is a support structure, that it's not predetermining where a new hole could be made, but that it's possible everywhere, is a kind of design. So there was a decision to enable the house to be treated roughly. Also the grey color, it was a lot of grey already, but in the end we used some cement in a very liquid way to put it on to have it as a more or less the same color. So there was a moment of design, because then it turned out to be much more sculptural. Then you had to go closer to find out about the layers that are in. And
Do you have a floor plan? Do you have a floor plan of the upper floor?
yes, we have a floor
Because she
plan.
says you did not want to design this, but on the other hand, I believe this is really a lot designed as inner space because of this curtain. Because of course you define spaces. You just take a box.
Okay, it's a box, that's an EV scheme. The first decision is to making the open floor plan.
Exactly.
No? As you can see here, so what's dark red is a sauna,
Yep.
and left an oven in front, and left is the bathroom. That's also heated by the sauna, and there is a kitchen front there. There is this kind of seat here, so that's what we have put in. There is this kind of functional box, which is clearly a design part. To put it all together and say, well, now we have an open floor plan. That's also support structure for the roof. And in this version now the curtain is different, but for sure we thought we should do it with two lines. The first calculation, then the calculation turned out that we could even reach this with one curtain, and we tested it with one curtain. But the form is for sure. You see, okay, there is a stairs coming up, you need some space to have a landing, you want to have maybe the eating part within the curtain, but that's like really questions we have as an architect. How huge at the minimum we would like to have. Now we even have the eating table out of the curtain, and we decided to have two possibilities for two beds, and we can even eat just in front of the oven, or if it's cold you get in the sauna. And so it changed, but clearly this line is the work of an architect.
I mean, there's also, you could also reference it to Lina Bobadi at certain points, or, I mean, there's even kind of every part of the vocabulary of architecture can be found.
She had to draw the line before.
Really? I didn't know.
Yeah, for sure, she made a formwork, it's a concrete building, it's a stocked playground.
Yeah.
So she had to define it before, but even Le Corbusier in Chandigarh did this kind of freeform openings. But you're right, so we started by refusing to design the opening and giving it to a kind of shared process, but with the curtain we had to design it, and there was no way. We were trying and trying, to be honest, how can we generate the curtain without this kind of decision making, at least because they're so obvious. Even but in the end, it's about a lot of decision making.
But now, maybe just...
Where's the curtain? Yeah, go on.
No, but just to relink it to the first part of of the discussion, doesn't, in the same way that you propose to reuse this kind of weird basement space of public ground and say this is not a waste space, this is a museum, doesn't your treatment of this ruin and the fact that now it's a summer house somehow make it, no matter if anti or not, but just makes it a villa? Like in the end, it's not an anti-villa. In the end, the perception of it makes it in a bit a villa again, doesn't it?
For sure, it's a villa. It's even the nicest villa in a surrounding of 100 kilometers. That's no doubt.
No, it's not a critique. It's just an
No,
understanding of this concept.
And we want to celebrate it.
Yes.
But by adding anti-villa, there is no anti-villa, no? You have never heard of an anti-villa before.
Yeah.
So, and that brings people to something that, okay, why do they call it anti-villa? Is it just by this rough look of these openings? But okay, there's something behind this energy. What does that mean? Standards? Okay, they only have 80 square meters in winter time. So, and we thought it was very helpful to make this building, in terms of energy consumption, whatever, an argument to name it anti-villa. Otherwise, we could have only operated with a pure image, as this was a question. And the image is basically a one-liner, no? If you go to this image. You can't read it in there, so we helped it by naming it differently.
I have a question. In this project, you really play with the border between legal and illegal, and you push the limits of what is legal. But in the project that you showed before in the towers, you're clearly declaring we do something that is not legal.
Which is not legalized.
Or which is not allowed according to law. So I'm very curious, what are the consequences of doing that? Can they come and knock it down? Can they fine you? I wonder if, actually, why is it not done more? That we just say, what the hell, let's do this and wait and see what happens.
Let's see, the first thing is you won't get a credit by the bank if you don't have a proper permission for a project. So you really have to finance it out of the pocket. The second is, you would never spend a lot of money in something you don't know whether you're allowed to use. So now you start to calculate the money we put in, do we have enough pleasure by doing so to spend this money? And then I found out, wow, that's great. There is a filmmaker who's interested in, there is a teacher of the ETH who's interested in, there is a writer who's working for Der Spiegel, the German magazine. So, but what does that mean? So, we have a writer for Der Spiegel. So, in case it's getting really thin, the ice we are standing on, for sure we can use Der Spiegel for campaigning and putting this question of, it is still, let's say, contemporary to call an industrial area if it's within the city. And what could happen? They could, they first have to send us letters, official letters, where they ask us to stop. There's a whole procedure till the first, let's say, the first fine would come. The first fine would be 500 euro. Okay, we can send 500 euro. To knock it down, they did not even knock it down because it's so a heavy construction. So they will never knock it down. And then there is a very interesting case. We use it as a cultural, let's say, center. Not a center, but a cultural opportunity. All the East Germany production places had, here they had a cultural barrack, a very small one, but they had a huge cultural house. So the culture of work in East Germany was embedded in the production method. So they were thinking work is also part of our culture. So and now it's becoming to kind of very nice discussion. So now we can discuss, well, we had the reunification, basically it was not reunification, but maybe we lost something that work, labor, is part of culture. Maybe we should implement their thinking of culture being part of production of all these processes maybe we should implement it. Then it's becoming a completely different discussion. And then we can say, okay, we are discussing the culture versus production situation in East and West, and they are sending us a fine of 500 euros. What's going on? Now at that moment it's like, and for sure we can publish that and ask the public, do you think it's right that we have to pay 500 euros because we deal with the history of the East in terms of production and culture? And for sure also politicians now get interested in that kind of, is it possible to rewrite narratives? And if this narrative is functioning, if it's getting enough people that share this narrative, that would indicate, okay, there is a kind of neighborhood. Could we go for a new lawmaking? So basically we're just suggesting they should cross it from the list of pure industrial area and call it an urban Gebiet, an urbanes Gebiet. That's all we are asking for. And it's a process that I'm not sure whether we can make it within the next 4 years in that legislation, but I think we can. And it's also, it's, let's say, it doesn't mean that you don't make any, that you don't get commissions. Now it's all sounding so well, all self-paid, and to this, in Lichtenberg, we also brought an art collector there to buy a huge ground. It's the same area, it's forbidden to have culture. So he has his collection there, he's showing the collection, he's turning everything to artist studios, which is forbidden. Because artist studio is not industry, it's only Gewerbe, how would you call it, production. But there it's specifically industrial area. So now he's campaigning as well. We are building a new art hall now for that guy. And we are building new ateliers. When we asked for permission, we called the art hall, we called it storage building. When this was authorized, we got a permission for a storage building, we called it a show storage. And they denied. Okay? Then we brought it to the Senate, because if they denied something, we can also, let's say, ask somebody to check whether this denial is okay or not. And the Senate now said, well, no, it's okay. For sure, we have been talking to the Senate before, and they proposed us that we can do it that way. Yeah, so, and it was the same for the artist studio. So first we called it pure, more industrial, loud, noisy production space, and then we asked for a change of use to make it artist ateliers. And we were renting them, or this investor then was renting them all to the Senate for 10 years, rather cheap, that they can use them for the atelier program of the city, because now atelier space is becoming very. So the Senate was renting a building which was officially not allowed to be artist studios, as artist studios. They really like this.
So in a way, it's just faster than the bureaucracy can be.
Yeah. Yeah, because they have, even the people working in the bureaucracy, they tell us it's completely right. It's so great that we have this industrial run-down area, that we have art hall now. But I have to write you that you are not allowed. So you go to the chief of that person. The chief would say, well, I love it that it's coming, but that's by law, that's by the existing, let's say, constitution of the law, that we can't allow it. So what does that mean if the kind of, let's say, collective intelligence is already further developed, or let's say an area already changed to something that's not embedded in the text that was written in 58, in that case. And for sure to rewrite that text is like years. Because it's going first the Landesentwicklungsplan, then you know all this kind of, when you decide new referendums in Switzerland about how long these periods are.
What is it then? Let's say your goal is to change the laws or to label them?
No, we try to, it's basically, look at the building. Would you have, isn't it a great kind of work It's more to labor also, to break these openings, but it's a huge pleasure in this change of the two buildings, no? If this was the first one, sorry to go back so quickly. If this was the first one, I think it's worse to do. The situation improved, so this is a piece of architecture.
Yeah, but that means that if you say that, also let's say people that have the power, they also say, yeah, this is great. So maybe then there is also a good idea to do a bit even further, no?
Yeah, it starts with exhibition. When this is going to the biennial, that's first step. When this is going to the front cover of New York Times Magazine, next step. And so it's like really focusing and trying to redirect it to the authorities. So it makes no sense when New York Times Magazine is not read by the mayor. For sure, we have sent to the whole Senate, we have sent the New York Times Magazine. And as it's fancy, and we asked them to write that Berlin is great and upcoming, they like it. But then it's a question: where is the work of design ending? If it's about campaigning, so that was something you were like saying in your pamphlet. That's bad. No, that it's all like all these images. It's all like pre-configured. It's all coming out of economical logic. It is, but here it's coming out from the opposite economical logic.
It's twisted somehow.
And I have to say, I didn't start like that. Maybe I show one image of my very first building. It was because then you can see for sure when you.
Can I ask you something just before changing the image? Would you affirm that in this way of doing architecture, the process is for you more important than the final result, or the final result, the image, is for you more important than the process in the end?
Now it would be easy to say yes, if you make it either or question. So first I would say if all the steps and the thousands of decisions that are involved in the process are nice, are beautifully thought, then the result is also beautiful, even if you don't know before, and even if this aesthetic is not known as beautiful before. So the American blogs came up with this new term, beautiful. And so you can see and for sure I'm interested in the nicest architecture I can imagine. Even I don't know in the beginning how it will look like. So it's not like I can't render it, let's say after 4 weeks. We can do photos afterwards. We can try to, with this drill, we try to simulate what would happen if we just break it up. But even then we thought the logic is completely different. It's always in a completely different way controlled.
So it is like a decreasing control, it's not a lack of control.
I think, yeah. And it makes even more work, no? Because if you once have, let's say, if you made a design, how long do you have 1 semester, let's say, you make one design. If that would be built, you would really exactly know what to build. It would be execution of still a lot of work, because then you have to make it into 1:50 scale and all these things. But you, especially when you made really detailed renderings, you know what you will build. And I somehow got disappointed by that process, because then the design process, what we call design, is like, let's say, your 3 months of a semester, and then it's like 2.5 years to execute the building. And the whole fun was yesterday or last year or... So the first building, that was for sure, it was luck, with 2 partners. Also a very old guy from House Zucker Co. was this building. Maybe I'll show another image, maybe I'll show this one. So this is a museum of mankind in Neanderthal. It's just a spiral going up, ending in a kind of view to the surrounding where they found the bones. It's not new. even Frank Lloyd Wright Museum was done with a ramp. It's a very nice building in a very nice landscape. And when it was finished, and it was exactly the case, so we did it with a very short period, then post-designing a little bit, but the relation between the part where we were really excited, like burning for the project, like thinking about it, and the phase to realize it was really like 1 to 10, 1 to 15 even. And the other thing is, when it was standing there, I thought, well, but what can I learn from that for next building? Yeah, I could say now my hubris is growing, I will be a museums architect worldwide, which didn't happen. Like, maybe then I would have developed differently, but still I would say it's not a stupid one, because it's like construction-wise, narrative-wise, it's an interesting building, but basically you can't learn something out of it that you can transfer into another question. It's not a case study, it's a singular object. It's a closed circle. So that's maybe...
I mean, close for you as an architect, or close for people who go there?
People who go there, they know how to walk. So or you also as an architect, know, like a colleague, what can you learn out of that? Well, they used that material, or they made a detail, that corner like this and that, but that's maybe not too interesting. You can't make a copy out of it, it's because it's just for Neanderthal make, a museum of mankind, evolution makes sense. Even in the end, the narrative was wrong. No, the Neanderthal man died out like the whole tribe 60,000 years ago, and we would still call it a kind of evolution, showing that in a kind of narration in the architecture, that the ramp is going up to the light, so from the cave, from the dark to the light, and yeah, for sure that's something that's can win a competition. Yeah, that's what we want to hear. It's getting better. We can come into the light.
I maybe have I don't know if we still have time, but...
If there's any other question, feel free.
Yeah, go for your one, Carl.
Then we go for you.
Okay, no, just it's maybe a very different question, but I still find it nonetheless interesting, because as far as I know, your practice was originally based in Cologne, and then, as you said in the beginning, you resettled at one point to Berlin. And I just find it interesting that your projects seem to have like a very, very local grip on a lot of things. Like, they seem to be very well connected. Just the fact that you discover maybe plots that are not used, or you manage to get the lights from the Rudolf Schwarz church, which I'm sure a lot of architects would love to have. How does that work? Like, how did you manage to, within a rather short time, make so many kind of projects in a city like Berlin, where my impression, or I think of a lot of us, the impression always is, yeah, I mean, what they don't need is creative people who want to fulfill themselves. But then you come, and somehow there seems to be a lot of space. Did it help you in the end that you were maybe an outsider? Or I don't know, maybe you are originally from the area? Or no?
Let's say Berlin was very... It's closing now more and more, but it was very welcome. That's the first moment. I think if I would have come to Zurich, maybe it would have been rather different. But maybe if I would have come to Zurich in the 80s, you know, with all the drug scene and little rioting and the opera burning, and it might have been different. So it's also kind of, it was lucky also. And it was necessary to make this first building in Brunnenstraße, which gave like completely, which were most of the cultural producers could find themselves as a kind of other image of architecture within the city, because basically that was also an advantage. What was produced was all this kind of stone facades under building director Stiemann, and then Regula Lischer came, and it was possible to do something different. that needed this first icon, let's say that it became an icon in Berlin. And then people would also phone now to tell me, well, there is a site, it's still abandoned, maybe you know how to connect it. Or there was one case of a church of Dittmann, so a really, really nice church. And I got to know, somebody told me, well, they will like demolish it. So we checked with the listed authorities that they put it on their preservation list. That was the first thing. Then I brought two clients in, a gallery and a collector. The collector was now Lichtenberg. The gallerist got it as Johann König, so to adapt this church to a gallery space. And so people now, it's not only that we find it all now, but as people now know we might be sensitive or even be able to connect it to people who can use it, it's also coming towards us now. And
yeah, I have another question. I was interested in your practice relation or affinity with real estate, and I was wondering if any of your projects ever had a negative effect on what actually you use, so if they actually heightened the real estate prices of the area around, rather than you benefiting on the low prices.
100% right.
Sorry?
You're 100% right.
Yeah. So I was wondering what you thought about that, and actually if you think of that in the process of making it, and maybe like.
So this building in Copenhagen, they asked for a sports culture center that should combine home and low culture, because there were some graffitis on the wall. That was all. There were no trucks, nothing. There were just some graffitis. And for sure, even if we that, okay, we make future and we just provide like less temperature for your sports, but even better than the rain, it's part of a upgrading process. And the Berlin project Bundesstraße was really cheap, but we would have, if we would have the whole block, maybe even not, if we would have the whole part of the city to build with 1,000 euros square meter, then there would be more space that is cheap. What's happened, that we put that area in Bundesstraße exactly on the map. So after that, like some galleries came back, we also have a gallery in the house, bars reopened, and so you are right, it's not all, even if it's a case study for certain thinking, doesn't mean that it's able to guarantee, not at all. But for example, in Lichtenberg with the towers, we would really like, and we also say that in public, we like to gentrify a little bit in Lichtenberg. So you could ask everybody there, they would, please, can we have a little sexy Berlin out here? So this G word, this bad gentrification word, what does it mean? So it's, in the end, any kind of movement is fine if it's not leading to more exclusion than before. You have to find a definition, because otherwise it's like, but you're completely right, Bundesstraße is part of the gentrification process there, although in the bad way. So the prices there, when we built that in 2006, the rental price would be €5.50 per square meter for a house. Now the rental price in that area is €12. So within 10 years, doubling, which is a lot. So okay, how much are we part of that process? Yeah, maybe we are, I don't know how many percent, but...
So I would like to thank you again for coming. For me it was a very nice discussion. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you again, Arno, for coming to Mendrisio and discussing with us.